Everything was a rush job, really. My employers had just acquired a much smaller company that had recently gone bankrupt. I think they probably got everything on the cheap from the administrators. Although my employer had been very successful and completely swamped with work in recent months, our management team was in a bit of a panic, trying to get this new acquisition up to speed and running smoothly. Consequently, we were sent there to reassign staff and oversee the installation of our company's systems. In short, it was chaos for several weeks. There was virtually no time for planning, and everything was done on the fly, right down to replacing the new company's inadequate computer network and adding all the necessary wiring. In a nutshell, the 10 of us scurried around the city like blue flies during the day and gathered in the bar of our hotel each evening to plan what would happen the next day. None of us lived more than an hour away by train, but we often stayed in town for those much-needed evening meetings. One or two members of the team managed to escape home to see their families, but who could afford to do so depended on what was happening that day and the next morning. Feeling pretty tired, I had already been sitting at the hotel bar for about half an hour, waiting for the rest of the team to show up, when Sherry walked into the lobby. Sherry was one of the computer nerds hired by a specialized company to help set up the computer systems and train staff on how to use them. She took me by surprise when I realized exactly who had entered the bar. Sherry definitely didn't look like the nerdy girl I knew, the one who spent all day teaching new hires how to use our company's systems. Gone was the baggy sweater, calf-length skirt, and glasses, replaced by a teasingly short skirt and a well-fitting silk blouse. She didn't look around and consider the establishment as one might expect. Sherry simply settled on a bar stool and ordered a drink. I figured she was waiting for someone, probably wondering which of my married coworkers was about to lose their way. Okay, I'll admit it. I got up from the table like a hamstring and very quickly sank down on the stool next to Sherry. "Hey, beautiful, what's a pretty girl like you doing in a backwater like this?" I asked in as sexy a voice as I could muster. Sherry turned and looked in my direction, probably intending to give me an evil look and tell me where I could get off. But then she recognized me. "Oh God, Steve, stop fooling around." "What are you doing here?" she grinned. "I'm staying here, Sherry," I said, gesturing for the bartender to put her drink on my tab. "Hey, I asked you first anyway. I'm meeting John, one of those electrician guys, for dinner. He lives in town and will pick me up in a bit," she replied, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Here, I thought you computer people were all staying in Connaught." "Yeah, but John doesn't need to know that, does he?" She winked at me. "Besides, the fewer people who know I'm dating, the better. I don't date coworkers from my company. It leads to too many complications." "Ah, does that explain why you hide your light in the office?" "I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. I guess I'll take it as a compliment." "It's definitely a compliment, Sherry. Now that you're sitting here, I can see your appearance and your expert disguise skills at work. Boy, you clean up good, girl. Poor John is going to get the shock of a lifetime when he gets here." She grinned. "Most of the people I teach to operate our systems are men, Steve. Let's just say they take instructions much better when they're looking at a monitor rather than trying to sneak a peek at my divine riches. Now you know the secret to my business success, Steve." "Yeah, it felt pretty damn good when I realized it was you sitting there." "Man, don't give me that, Steve. I'm willing to bet that you were watching my every move and that it took you longer to raise your gaze to my face." "Yes, I admit it, and who could blame me for that? Sherry, you are a fine example of your gender. It's a shame you don't date your coworkers." I smirked at her. "Steve, you've always been a charmer, even for that weirdo in the office. But remember, you don't work for the same employer as me, so technically, we're not coworkers." "What a charming idea, Sherry. There's just one catch. I'm married. Damn, just when I thought I'd get lucky." She grinned. "But if you ever get bored with married life, you know my company's phone number." We joked in the same vein for another 20 minutes, until eventually Sherry's date showed up. When he recovered from his shock, they left together. I bought myself another drink and went back to my table in the corner to wait for my coworkers. About 10 or 20 minutes later, I went to the bathroom. While I was in there, another guy came in and started using the urinal next to mine. "Pretty girl," he commented. "Excuse me?" I said, not sure I'd heard him correctly. It's always a little uncomfortable when a complete stranger strikes up a conversation with you in the men's room. You never know what his motives are, but I tried to remain polite. "That girl you were talking to at the bar is very pretty," the man clarified. "Yes, she is, isn't she? Are you in town on business?" he asked as I started to wash my hands. "Yes, we're opening a new branch in town." "Married?" "Yes, but why do you ask?" "Oh, I was just thinking. Married men away from home should keep an eye on who's watching them when they're talking to pretty girls in hotel bars." By then, the guy was washing his hands, and I was drying mine under the fan. I was chronically confused by him. I tried to figure out if he was a weirdo trying to pick me up or an unlikely pimp looking for business for his girls. "Are you implying something?" "Yes, you've been to the bar 3 nights this week, and whenever you're there, so is that little shithead in the other corner. Haven't you noticed him?" "No, I really don't understand. What are you trying to say?" As soon as you talked to that girl, he started fiddling with his phone. What's more, when you go up to your room in the evening, he goes out into the lobby and stays there until midnight. By then, we had already left the men's room, and the guy told me he couldn't say anything more as he thought the goon hiding in the corner might have spotted him. He asked for my cell phone number and said he'd call me in a few minutes, then walked out the front door of the hotel. Confused, I returned to my seat at the bar, still trying to figure out why I had given a complete stranger my cell phone number. True to his word, my cell phone rang a few minutes later. It was the same guy, and he told me to just sit quietly and listen, then launched into an almost unbelievable story. He rambled on for quite some time, but the gist of his tale was that he had recently been set up by his now ex-wife. He explained that while on a business trip, he had innocently struck up a conversation with a pretty young woman sitting at the hotel bar. During their conversation, she revealed that she had come to the bar to hide from her abusive ex-husband, whom she had spotted on the street before he could see her. It didn't occur to my gullible new friend that sitting on a stool by the bar wasn't the best place for her to hide. If he hadn't been so fascinated by her attractive looks and sob story, he might have realized that the best place for her was in a dark corner. In any case, she pointed out the marks on her face and hands that made him assume someone had recently abused her, and accordingly, he swallowed her story hook, line, and sinker. She then suddenly announced that her husband was about to enter the bar and fled through a door at the back of the room. Fearing for her safety, my new friend followed her and quickly discovered that she was trying to hide in an alcove in the hallway. He offered to get her a room for the night where she could hide out, but she insisted she couldn't go out into the hotel lobby because her ex-husband would likely see her. Yes, even I guessed what would happen next. After much discussion, it was decided that the girl would take the key from him and hide in his room, while my new friend would book another room for himself. He would then give her the key, and she could hide there for the night, which is exactly what happened. As soon as he gave the girl the key, she hugged him and kissed him on the cheek as a sign of gratitude, after which he escorted her to her room and immediately returned to his own. The next morning, he did not see the girl and treated the incident as a slightly expensive act of old-fashioned chivalry. Feeling quietly pleased with himself, he thought the incident was over. But it was not. A few days later, while unpacking his suitcase, his wife discovered a pair of women's underwear at the bottom of it, and then all hell broke loose. A few days later, he was served with divorce papers, and in them, he discovered that a certain young woman had confessed to having sexual intercourse with him in his hotel room that night. The underwear served as damning evidence, and his wife had no reason to doubt the woman's story. Now, he was embroiled in a messy and costly divorce that was tearing his life apart. As I listened to this guy's story, a chill ran down my spine. It seemed absurd, almost like something out of a bad movie, but the way he told it with such earnest desperation made me take it seriously. He warned me to be careful, to watch my back, and to stay away from the bar for the rest of my stay. He didn't want me to end up like him, a victim of a calculated setup. After he hung up, I sat there, staring at my phone, my mind racing. The idea that someone could be watching me, setting me up for a fall, was deeply unsettling. I glanced around the bar, half expecting to see the little shithead the guy had mentioned, but the place looked as ordinary as ever. I decided then and there that I would heed the warning. I left the bar and went straight to my room, feeling a mix of paranoia and anger. The next few days, I kept a low profile, avoiding the bar and any unnecessary interactions. I focused on my work, determined to get through the chaos of the new acquisition and return home without any more drama. In the end, I managed to get through the rest of the assignment unscathed. But the whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. It was a stark reminder of how easily things could go wrong, how quickly a seemingly innocent situation could spiral into a nightmare. I never found out who the little shithead was or if the story was entirely true, but it didn't matter. The lesson was clear. In this line of work, you could never be too careful. What's more, there were pictures of him with this young woman at the bar and entering and/or leaving his hotel room. He claimed that the whole pantomime had been set up by his wife and her lover, who he later found out was her boss at the place where she worked before the children came along. Although he had no proof of this fact, nor did he have any proof that his wife had been intimate with this guy until after their divorce was finalized and they officially separated. The bastard was at her house when the judge ordered the separation, and I was forbidden to go near the house because the cow claimed I threatened her with violence. Now she has a house because I have to provide housing for the kids until they come of age. I'm burdened with child support and the upkeep of this goddamn house, and all the while that asshole is sleeping there with my ex-wife. I understand your obvious frustration, my friend, but what does this have to do with me? I asked when he finally fell silent. Are you sitting at the corner table you and your friends have been using all week? He asked. Yes, then, try not to be too conspicuous, but there should be a young fellow sitting alone in the corner by the opposite wall. I suppose he's almost hidden from you behind that damn plant. I casually glanced in the direction my new friend was pointing. Sure enough, there was someone behind the plant, but I couldn't see who. Yeah, I think I see him. Well, I don't know what his game is, but that little asshole is watching you, my friend. I'm just nodding at you because you seem like a pretty decent guy, and I'd hate to see you get stitched up like I did. You are very kind, my friend, but I do not intend to stray from the righteous path. Me too, my friend, and actually I didn't do it. But that didn't stop me from getting framed. For some reason, your wife must think you fornicate when you're outside the house. Never. I'm very rarely out of the house at all. This is my first trip in over a year, I informed him. Pretty strange, don't you think? Why else would this guy be following you? Are you sure he's following me? Yes, of course. He's been following you at the hotel for the last 3 nights. Nonsense, my friend. It must be pure coincidence that we both arrive at the hotel at about the same time every evening. He doesn't live in the hotel. He goes home just after 1 o'clock in the morning. Look, I can prove it to you. Finish your drink and leave the hotel. Walk to the plume of feathers. It's only a couple 100 yards or so. There are a lot of entrances there, so if he's following you, as I assume he is, he'll have to follow you inside the pub to make sure you don't slip out of one of them. If you stand at the counter itself, you can watch his entrance in the mirror behind it. As I left the hotel, I walked past the other guys and told them I'd be right back. It wasn't until about halfway to Plume of Feathers that I wondered if I was doing the right thing. After all, there was a distinct possibility that I was setting myself up for a mugging or something. There were very few people around. I made it safely to the Plume and ordered a pint of beer. Sure enough, the young goon I'd risked a quick glance at on my way out of the hotel bar walked in and bought himself a drink at the far end of the bar. He then took a seat at the far end of the room from where he could watch me. A few minutes later, my cell phone rang again. Was I right or wrong? Yes, I agreed. He's standing against the wall and trying to pretend he's not watching me. What are you going to do with him? The hell he knows. Well, just don't do anything stupid like letting him know you spotted him or chatting up any of the barmaids. Let me think about it, and I'll call you tomorrow. But what if he's planning to rob me or something. No, he's not like that. I'm guessing he's a college student moonlighting at some dubious private detective agency. He certainly has no idea how to covertly spy on someone. I never noticed him. You, my friend, are too much like me. The thought of straying doesn't cross your mind, and so you have no reason to be constantly looking over your shoulder. Your red-haired buddy, on the other hand, is always on the lookout and constantly scanning the neighborhood. I'm a little surprised he didn't notice your shadow. Yes, the red-haired coworker he was talking about is actually the office Casanova, and that's who I first suspected Sherry had come to the hotel to meet with. After finishing my pint of beer at the Plume, I walked back to the hotel via a somewhat winding route that took me along the river. I hoped I looked like I was out for an evening walk to get some fresh air. Back at the hotel, the guys were curious as to where I had disappeared to, but didn't question me. Then we got busy going over the plans for the office and discussing what we hoped to accomplish the next day. Later, as I was leaving the bar and heading to my room, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that someone was hiding behind that damn plant again. "Are you okay?" my new friend asked, calling me the next afternoon. "Yeah, okay, but I still can't understand why this guy is tailing me. You want to know?" "Yeah, I guess I do. Someone has to be paying that bastard, and if my wife is spending my hard-earned money, I'm going to be very annoyed." "Okay, leave it to me." There are a couple of other divorced husbands working in the office I've been seconded to. I'll have to stay out of sight because the creep might recognize me, but we think we have a solid plan to grab the creep and ask him what he's doing without letting on that he's watching you. That would be quite a feat, wouldn't it? No, the boys will trick him into thinking they were hired to watch you too and pounce on the kid. Hell, he's just a kid. He'll probably wet his pants. Thought so. He explained that the house was lit up, music was playing, and the curtains were drawn. We waited in a quiet corner about a block away from my house, keeping an eye on the street. My heart was pounding, but my new friend seemed calm and collected. We didn't have to wait long. A sleek black car pulled up in front of my house, and out stepped a well-dressed man who looked to be in his late 40s. He casually walked up to the front door and knocked. Moments later, Jana opened the door and greeted him with a smile that seemed a bit too warm for a mere acquaintance. "Bingo," whispered my new friend. "That's our guy." "What now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now we wait," he replied. "We need to catch them in the act. Give it a few minutes." We stood there in the shadows, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. My mind raced with scenarios of what might be happening inside. I fought the urge to storm in and confront them. Finally, my friend gave the signal, and we moved towards the house, staying out of sight as much as possible. "Remember, let me do the talking," he instructed. "We need to handle this carefully." He knocked on the door, loud enough to be heard over the music, but not so loud as to arouse suspicion from the neighbors. Gina opened the door, her face turning pale when she saw us. "Hello, Gina," my friend said smoothly. "May we come in?" Before she could respond, he gently pushed past her, and I followed. We found the man sitting comfortably on our couch, a drink in hand. He looked up, surprised but not alarmed. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I might ask you the same question," my friend replied, his tone icy. "But let's cut to the chase. We know what's going on here, and it's time to come clean." Gina started to protest, but my friend held up a hand to silence her. "Save it, Gina. We've got all the evidence we need. Now, you can either come clean and save yourself a lot of trouble, or we can take this to court and drag it out for everyone to see." The man on the couch shifted uncomfortably, his bravado slipping. "Look, this is a misunderstanding. Spare me," my friend interrupted. "We've been watching you for days. The game's up. Now, let's talk about how we're going to handle this." After a tense standoff, the man finally relented. "Fine, what do you want?" My friend smiled. "First, you're going to write a statement admitting to everything. Then, you're going to make sure Gina gets nothing out of this divorce. If you cooperate, we'll keep this quiet. If not, well, let's just say the consequences won't be pleasant." Jana looked like she wanted to argue, but the man put a hand on her arm. "Do as he says," he muttered. We watched as he wrote out a confession, detailing his affair with Gina and their plans to use the fabricated evidence against me. When he was done, My friend took the statement and nodded. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said. "Now get out and don't come back." The man left quickly, with Gina trailing behind him, throwing a final, venomous glance in my direction. When they were gone, my friend turned to me. "Well, that's that. You're free, my friend. Now, how about a drink to celebrate?" I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Yeah, I could use one. As we sat down with a couple of beers, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought this man into my life. Without him, I might never have uncovered the truth. Now, I had a chance to start over, free from the deceit and betrayal that had plagued my marriage. And as for Gina and her lover, I had a feeling they wouldn't be causing me any more trouble. He told me that 5 minutes ago, Gina had opened the door of the built-in garage and rolled our car into the street. "Looks like her guest intends to stay all night," he commented. We spent some time peering into storefronts in an area of town where we couldn't be seen from the road until my companion announced that the game was on. We then headed toward my house. My companion stopped me from barging in like a bull in a china shop. He pointed out that tonight was probably not the first night Gina had had visitors, so there was no point in closing the stable door after the horse had galloped away. We needed to give them enough time to get a proper handle on whatever it is they're about to get into. That way, we could get the evidence I would need when it came to the trial. My companion was evidently more experienced in such matters than I was, so I followed his advice. We lingered in the garden for about 20 minutes until my impatience took over. Then I crept to the window of the back parlor. Fortunately, the curtains, which Gina had been so pleased to find, had shrunk a little when she washed them. I never had time to pull the steps apart again and to correct the frilly cord so that they closed completely in the middle. I never thought Gina was capable of such a thing. She was completely naked and kneeling between the legs of an equally naked Tony Alex. He was one of our local councilors, no less, and a potential parliamentary candidate for his party at the next general election. Our current MP had already announced that he intended to resign. It was quite clear that Gina was committing an act that a certain former president of the United States famously claimed did not constitute sexual relations. I disagreed with that somewhat. I only found out that the bastard's name was Tony Alex because Gina had delivered circulars from his political party before the last local elections. Gina was not an ardent supporter of the party, but inexplicably became involved in the last local election campaign. I have wondered ever since whether Gina's affair with Alex was the result of her working for the party during that election, or whether her sudden interest in local politics and elections was the result of her and Alex's affair. I must admit that I will probably never know the answer to that question. I suppose I was still pondering the question when my companion pulled me away from the window. The last thing I had time to see was Gina's head rising and falling. As we moved away from the house, my companion handed me a small video camera with a lanyard around my neck. He explained that once we were inside the house, I should keep the camera pointed at Alex and Gina for as long as possible. But if Alex tried to attack me, I should just let go of the camera and defend myself. He reminded me that the camera would continue to record even if it was just hanging on the lanyard. And no matter what I said or did once we were in the house, I was not to threaten physical violence to any of the perpetrators in any way. "If he attacks you, smash his head in for all I care, but don't raise your hand to him first," he said. With a deep breath and a racing heart, I nodded and we proceeded to the front door. My companion, who clearly had a knack for such situations, quickly picked the lock and we quietly slipped inside. The sounds of Gina's moans and the rhythmic creaking of furniture filled the air, making my stomach churn. I steeled myself, knowing that this was the only way to get the proof I needed. We crept down the hallway, and as we approached the living room, the sounds grew louder. I could see their intertwined bodies reflected in the hallway mirror, and I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. My companion gave me a nod, signaling that it was time to move. I burst into the room, camera held high and aimed directly at them. Gina screamed and scrambled to cover herself, while Alex, caught off guard, tried to shield his face. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. Exactly what it looks like, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. I hope you two enjoyed yourselves, because this is all going to the court. Alex lunged towards me, but my companion stepped in, his presence intimidating enough to make Alex think twice. I wouldn't do that if I were you, my companion warned. Jaina, tears streaming down her face, pleaded, please, let's talk about this. It doesn't have to go this far. I kept the camera steady, capturing every moment. It's too late for that, Gina. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. With the footage I needed, we backed out of the room and left the house. The adrenaline still coursed through my veins, but I felt a strange sense of relief. The worst part was over. Now it was time to take control of my life and start anew. As we walked back to the car, my companion clapped me on the back. You did well. It's never easy, but now you've got what you need. I nodded, grateful for his help and support. Thank you. I don't think I could have done it without you. Anytime, he replied with a reassuring smile. Let's get that footage to your lawyer and make sure Alex and Gina get what they deserve. We drove off into the night, the weight of the betrayal lifting from my shoulders. A new chapter was beginning, and this time, I would be in control. I will keep this camera on you at all times to prove that you didn't attack him, and I will try to keep it on both of them as much as possible, my companion assured me. 2 cameras? I asked, surprised by his thoroughness. Yes, it's my business, selling video cameras in bulk. Didn't I tell you? He replied. You haven't told me anything about yourself. I don't even know your name, I said, feeling a bit uneasy about the mystery man who is now my ally. That's probably for the best if you decide you want the boys to handle the situation later, he said cryptically. After sneaking into the garage and quietly deflating all of Alex's car tires, we slipped through the fire door into the kitchen. From there, we could see and record what was happening in the living room, where Alex had returned the favor to Gina. It took all the self-control and influence of my companion to keep me from rushing into the room and using my right boot to make Alex sing alto from that day forward, or perhaps even castrato. Be that as it may, my obliging friend convinced me that neither the right boot nor the carving knife from the kitchen shelf would be conducive to my long-term well-being. In his view, HMG's extended holiday homes are places you visit, not establishments where you'd like to spend 10 or 15 years in confinement. How the hell Gina didn't notice us standing there recording the scene, I just don't understand. Then Alex seemed to tire of his labors and climbed on top of Gina, though she objected, saying he hadn't gotten her off yet. On reflection, I thought it was damned unsportsmanlike of him. Alex told Gina that he couldn't hold back any longer and started fighting her off as hard as he could. Oddly enough, Jenna told him to calm down and sort of hinted that he had offended her when he did this. Their conversation didn't make much sense because Alex interspersed almost every word he said with, "Damn bitch," and Gina repeated, "Oh shit." In all the years I'd known her, I'd never once heard Gina use a swear word. Usually, when we made love, she'd say, "Oh God." I always took that as a compliment, but perhaps I was wrong. Alex had been at it for several minutes when the cell phone on the coffee table rang. Alex put the receiver to his ear and said, "Hello." Things started to look comical from there. Of course, I could only hear one side of the conversation. What the caller was saying to him, I have no idea, but I think I got the gist of it. "How did you get this number?" Alex demanded. "No, I don't have anything I want to report to any newspaper." "How dare you, young man? If you make accusations like that in your newspaper, young man, I'll get you your own damn job." Jenna stopped her movements and looked at Alex. She must have sensed something in his tone, or maybe what the reporter had told him had put Alex out of the mood for sex, and it was affecting some part of his anatomy. "Now look at this. I'm visiting a local resident on official council business. My duties as a councilman include assisting." "That's none of your business, young man. Her husband knows perfectly well I'm here tonight." At this point in Alex's telephone conversation, Gina's eyes suddenly returned to the mirror on the wall, and a look of horror appeared on her face. "Steve! Oh God, no, Steve!" she howled at the top of her voice. Gina's sudden cry caught Alex off guard, and he looked up at her. I can only assume that he realized she was looking at something reflected in the mirror because he shifted his upper body to one side so that he could see my companion and me. There have not been many times in my life when I have seen real fear in someone's eyes, but that night I saw fear in Alex's eyes. You know, I don't know if he turned off his cell phone or not, but I do know that in a panic, he shoved Gina away from him with such force that she fell to the floor, smashing her head on the coffee table and briefly losing consciousness. I must say, I've never seen anyone get into a dress uniform so quickly. Then Alex found his jacket and threw it on. My companion shouldered me further into the living room as we continued to film Alex hurrying to leave the house. Later, I realized that my companion had led us out of the kitchen doorway to clear a path for Alex to the garage where his car was parked. With his boots in one hand and his underwear in the other, Alex rushed past us into the garage. Soon I heard him yell, "You bastards!" Meanwhile, my companion told me to check on Gina, but at the same time, he warned me to keep an eye on her while he kept an eye on Alex. From Alex's yelling, I assumed he had discovered that his car had 4 flat tires. Anyway, I heard the roller garage door open and he tried to drive away. By this time, I was near Gina, who had just regained consciousness, sat up, looked me in the eye, and immediately lost consciousness. At the same time, she banged her head once more unpleasantly against the floor. From my point of view, Gina did not seem to have had a very good evening. I decided I'd better call medical help for Gina, so without taking my eyes off Gina's naked body, I walked over to our landline and dialed 3 9s. I was answered that an ambulance and the police were on their way. Indeed, I heard the sirens before I even hung up the phone. Rather oddly, I was still standing there filming a semi-conscious Gina when a paramedic burst into the hall. "Time to leave, my friend." My companion returned and gently nudged me toward the door. He also put sunglasses on my nose and a huge trilby on my head, which he pulled tightly over the sunglasses. I have no idea where he got these things, and I was somewhat surprised to see that he was now dressed similarly. I realized why as we were leaving the house through the garage. A television crew, local news I realized, and several reporters were waiting to pounce on us. They pelted us with unanswerable questions as my companion led me to a waiting cab. Some stranger stood between the newspapermen, my companion, and me and repeated, "My client cannot make any statement at this time." As the cab took us to the train station, I looked at my companion. "What you told me is all bullshit," I asked him. "No, my wife stitched me up like I said she would, but her solicitor," he paused, looking at me intently. "Well, he was an asshole. You just met him this evening." "Alex?" I asked, feeling a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Yes, Alex. And last week, a buddy of mine who does private investigations told me that he was contacted by one Tony Alex and wants you to be monitored. My friend didn't like the job, it didn't make sense to him, and Alex wouldn't explain what it was about, so he turned it down. But my friend, aware of my hostility to Alex, warned me of his desire to be kept in the loop if you showed the slightest inclination to come home. A surprise of sorts. Well, it was quite obvious, wasn't it? It didn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together to realize what Alex's game was. Sorry about the press, but I wanted to make sure Alex's political aspirations were over. I hope it doesn't do his law business any good either. Actually, once they get their claws into that bastard, I'm sure the press will forget about you and your wife pretty quickly. There's plenty more juicy dirt in Alex's past for them to sink their teeth into. We were traveling north on the train when my companion informed me that Gina was in the local hospital. A hairline fracture of her skull, he thought. He then asked me if I wanted something done to Alex when the police were done with him. I looked at him with a question in my eyes, and he explained that Alex had found that driving a car with 4 flat tires was not easy, and he had crashed into at least 3 parked cars and ended up parked in a store window. Alex was last seen being taken away in the back of a police van. My interlocutor, who was apparently still in contact and receiving cell messages from eyewitnesses at the scene, was a bit vague about the exact reason for Alex's arrest. He simply called it a traffic violation. It seemed reasonable to me at the time. Driving a car with 4 flat tires certainly can't be legal. I later learned from television and newspaper reports that Alex panicked when he saw the roller garage door go up and television and press people gathered outside. He was standing in the garage in his undress, and my companion was blocking Alex's access to the switch that would close the door again. Then a panicked Alex jumped into his automobile and drove away, or more correctly, tried to drive away. The brief description I read in the press said that his car was certainly on the road, but hit a television cruise van as it left my house and numerous other parked cars as it drove down our street. Then, when Alex tried to turn onto the main road, he apparently collided with a passing truck. It appears that the collision with the larger vehicle gave Alex's car the momentum it needed to stampede into the storefront. Too bad our cab went the other way that night. I would have loved to see the carnage for myself. As we traveled, my companion informed me that this evening would probably be our last meeting, but he also said that, if all went according to plan, I would hear from him in the future. He apologized again for the unfortunate publicity, but said he needed something spectacular to let the dogs off the chain. It was many months before I realized what he was talking about. I'll come back to it later. At one point, as our train was crossing a bridge over a river, my traveling companion threw the cell phone he was using out the window. He told me that I would no longer be able to contact him on that phone, and neither would anyone else. "Keep the video camera. I have plenty of others," he smirked. "What about the movie in those two?" I asked. "I'm sure the chip in that camera is enough for what you need, Steve. I have plans for the records in them, and I may have to interfere a little. But don't worry, your wife's face won't end up in the papers." "Who cares?" I said, feeling the weight of the situation. "Yes, my friend, and I'm sorry that's going to happen. No man likes everyone knowing that his wife was a whore who hung up on him for God knows how long. It's not good for our ego, my friend, I assure you. Such is human nature." My companion got off the train a couple of stops before me. He shook my hand, apologized again for the publicity and for any other repercussions I might accidentally face in the future. He assured me that he would do his best to minimize them, but did not specify exactly what he thought might happen. One last time, he handed me a business card and told me it was the card of a lawyer who was at my house. He was a good man and could be trusted. I was to use his services for my divorce if I decided to get one, and for any other unforeseen circumstances. Then the train left the station, and I never met him in person again. But I was to hear from him and see his face again. But I will tell you about that a little later. The night man at the front desk caught me as I was entering the hotel and handed me a package marked urgent. I took it with me to the bar where, to tell the truth, I was going to eat to my heart's content. Who could refuse under such circumstances? At the bar, I tore the paper off the package, revealing a pristine envelope and a small box. Inside the envelope, I found a letter from the lawyer recommended by my mysterious companion. It contained detailed instructions on how to proceed with the divorce, a list of documents I needed to gather, and reassurances that I would be taken care of throughout the process. In the box, there was a brand new cell phone, already programmed with the lawyer's contact information and a few other crucial numbers. I ordered a whiskey, needing something strong to steady my nerves. The events of the evening replayed in my mind like a chaotic movie reel. Gina's betrayal, Alex's disgrace, the unexpected ally who had guided me through the ordeal. It was all too much to process at once. As I sipped my drink, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. My marriage was over, but so was the charade. The scandal would undoubtedly follow me for a while, but I was determined to rise above it. I had been given a second chance to reclaim my life, and I wasn't going to waste it. Finishing my drink, I gathered my thoughts and headed up to my room. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I had allies, I had a plan, and most importantly, I had the truth on my side. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the events of the evening over and over in my head. The betrayal, the confrontation, and the strange, almost cinematic turn of events that had led me to this point. Despite the chaos, a part of me couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The following morning, I woke up early, feeling surprisingly refreshed. I had a long day ahead of me, filled with legal proceedings and difficult conversations, but I was ready. I took a deep breath, steeled myself for what was to come, and stepped out into the new day, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I found that it contained the packaging from the manufacturer of the small video camera now in my pocket and a printed note. Essentially, the note instructed me not to get drunk. Instead, I was to go to my room and make at least one copy of the camera's memory card file on my laptop, and preferably several others on whatever media I had on hand. It also suggested that I not keep the copies and the original in the same place. After sipping my whiskey and ordering a chaser, I did as the note instructed, putting one copy of the file on a DVD, which I later removed and put in the hotel safe, and sending the other to my sister. I was only able to make 2 extra copies because I only carried a couple of blank DVDs and CDs in my laptop case. Driven by a mix of morbid curiosity and the need for clarity, I watched the pantomime one more time before attempting to fall asleep. In the end, sleep eluded me. God only knows what I looked like the next day, but everyone in the office tried to stay away from me if they could help it. Around mid-morning, 2 plainclothes policemen came to the office, wanting to have a quiet conversation with me. I took them to an empty office where we could have some privacy. They explained that there was a disagreement over how Gina, who claimed to remember nothing about the night before, had gotten a skull fracture, even though it was only a hairline fracture. The way they were talking, I realized that someone had suggested I had been acting rather aggressively the last time they'd seen Gina and me together. They didn't say who had claimed that, of course, but it wasn't hard for me to guess. They refused to confirm or deny that it was Alex. It took me a little while to find the right point in the recording, at which point I asked if they wanted a copy. Actually, they asked to take the original recording, but I told them I had no intention of letting the thing out of my possession. They eventually agreed to a copy, which I made while they were waiting, on a DVD I had gotten from one of the computer guys. While my laptop was burning the DVDs, I asked one of the girls to get us some tea, and the officers and I struck up a friendly conversation about the previous few days. That is, if you can have a friendly conversation at all with a police officer on duty. They showed a lot of interest in my mysterious friend, but I think it was just curiosity on their part. The videotape proved that he didn't hurt Gina either. Actually, the cops wanted to know if Alex could be charged because he pushed Gina away from him quite violently. They said they would ask CPS officials to look into it. I think they were just interested in who had a grudge against Alex and why. They said I should be on my guard and suggested that Alex was a pretty powerful lawyer. At the same time, they sort of hinted that they had reason to suspect that Alex was not entirely honest in all his actions. Like sleeping with other people's wives, I remarked. Oh, and not only that, Steve, we just can't get a handle on this creep. Let's just say he's unofficially on a lot of police officers' lists of interest. But if I may say so, you seem to be taking all this somewhat lightly, Steve. What else am I supposed to do, officer? Lose my temper and start beating my chest? If I had behaved as you suggest, wouldn't you be leading me in handcuffs to your car right now? I asked. Yes, Steve, I think it would, the officer smiled back at me. I can tell you from experience that when the stew is spilled and everything turns to shit, the best thing to do is laugh, or at least try to. It really helps those who wish you distress. Both officers laughed and shook my hand as they left. In the afternoon, I went looking for a working phone booth and called a lawyer a friend recommended to me. He was expecting my call and simply asked if I was going to get a divorce right away. When I said I had no other option if I wanted to keep in the public eye in the future, he simply said he would get started and then asked if he could send one of his staff over to me later that day. She would need to know all of Gina's details and my personal details. I asked him if I should give the woman a check to pay for his services, but he informed me that was already taken care of. Don't ask Steve, but you'll never get a bill for my services. Someone we both know intends to charge Alex for all the expenses, and he, as you know, comes from a very wealthy family, and he's made a lot of money himself, only not all of it strictly legal. In the evening, all the crew waited for me at the bar, obviously hoping that I had calmed down enough to tell them about the evening before. By then, they had all read the day's papers. I thought it was funny that after the first morning call, I didn't see a single newspaper tossed in the office. I told them the short version. I got home and caught Gina doing a whoopee with Tony Alex. They asked about the press coverage of the whole thing, but I denied everything I knew about how it had happened. It was the truth. I really had no idea about any of this. It was probably about 9 o'clock in the evening when my new lawyer, an extremely good-looking but also very efficient assistant or associate, arrived at the hotel to meet me. We made our way to the hotel library to meet privately. The first thing Miss Clarkson, yes, she was one of those types, told me was that she had already spoken to Gina and advised her to get a lawyer herself as soon as she was released from the hospital. It's much easier if the lawyer himself explains to him that he can't stand on his own 2 feet. Your wife doesn't want a divorce, you know? Yes, I know. Please look at all these messages she sent me today, I replied, showing her my cell phone. Did she try to call you? Yeah, but I'm pretty busy here. I suspect that's what he and Alex were counting on. That's about right. Alex has been stalking her for some time now. She claims he was successful just this week, but, well, in my experience, people tend to be stingy with the truth when it benefits them. Well, he would hardly go to the trouble of following my movements unless he had reason to believe that he would get an opportunity to put Gina to bed. Screw. I think that's the word you were looking for, Mr. Marshall. Steve, Miss Clarkson. Everyone knows me as Steve. Very well, Steve, but I'm afraid that to everyone but my fiancée, I'm Miss Clarkson. I imagine a very handsome man. And a very stoic Steve, believe me. Oh, I do, Miss Clarkson, I do. She smiled at me for the first time, her business-like expression softening, but then she returned to the reason for her visit. Surprisingly, she already knew almost everything there was to know. Miss Clarkson pulled a piece of paper out of her briefcase and sketched out a list of questions. Gina and my full names, date of birth, our wedding, and so on. I saw Miss Clarkson ticking off the correct answers she had already typed. There were a couple of minor errors, but nothing significant. Everything was there, including the value of our house, but not the contents of our bank accounts or the details of our savings. Not that I could remember them in detail myself. Miss Clarkson then placed a form in front of me that I was to sign. It was essentially a contract that asked her boss to act on my behalf in Gina's affairs and my divorce, as well as any other legal matters, whether they related to our divorce or not, until I canceled the contract in writing. Before leaving, Miss Clarkson suggested that I call Gina and talk to her. In fact, I had verbally made it clear that I had no intention of forgiving Gina for her act. She also said that I could find Gina at her sister's house. Your house is being watched by the press. Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable if you found another place to stay this weekend, Steve. Miss Clarkson had always seemed a little uncomfortable addressing me as Steve. By the way, your employer is doing an excellent job and is rather vague about your whereabouts. I wondered who, and more importantly, when did they ask them to do this? After Miss Clarkson had gone and I had been secretly questioned as to who my delightful visitor was, I went up to my room to call Gina. The guys were a little shocked when I told them that Miss Clarkson was a representative of my lawyer. None of them could figure out why she was visiting me at this hour, and even asked how much legal representation would cost me. The call was answered by June, Gina's sister. Our conversation was short and concise. All June could say was that she was personally sorry for what had happened and hoped we could remain friends. She then said she would go and get that stupid cow. 4 words that I think expressed June's attitude towards her sister's behavior. A year or so later, while on my honeymoon in Malta, by coincidence, I ran into June again. But I'll tell you about that too later. The press apparently learned of my whereabouts only after I had spent the weekend with my sister and her family. My sister and her husband were sympathetic and didn't pry any details out of me. Hell, they'd probably read most of them in the papers anyway. On Sunday evening, when I returned to the hotel, I was served with a restraining order. I couldn't understand what it was about, but over the phone, Miss Clarkson explained that Copland had obtained an emergency restraining order prohibiting me from releasing to the press any material taken that night or putting it on the internet. Come on, I couldn't make sense of all the legal nonsense they were spouting at the best of times, but at least Miss Clarkson got the point across to my thick skull. But I didn't do it, and I wasn't going to, I replied. We know, but someone else did, and still intends to do everything they can to embarrass Copeland. Oops, yes, and you can expect to be called before a high court judge tomorrow morning. But don't panic, we've got it all covered. I'm glad to hear you're not panicking. That's what you're paying us for. What can a high court judge do by sending me to jail? Well, yeah, but I told you we had it under control. Monday afternoon, I found myself in a courtroom and a very pissed-off judge was standing in front of me. I didn't utter a word. My barristers, several dressed in wigs and robes, did all the talking. I informed the judge that an anonymous third party was in possession of 2 recordings, similar to the one I had, taken at the same time. To my surprise, the police photo analyst confirmed that the images in question were not stills from the recording I had made. By the way, we are talking about 2 photos that somehow got into the hands of the national press. I believe that if Copland had done nothing, only the less reputable and sensationalist publications would have printed them. And eventually, they were, along with all the other newspapers and media outlets that were able to get their hands on these bastards. Both pictures showed Tony Copland. In one of them, he was looking at Gina's naked body with a surprised expression on his face. In the other, he was just putting on his pants, and Gina was lying naked on the floor behind him. In none of the pictures was Gina recognizable. The judge seemed to have a hard time believing that I had no idea who my mysterious companion was that evening, and practically stated so. In the end, however, he seemed to agree with my reasoning. And he reminded me, actually informed me, since I didn't understand the court order handed to me at the hotel, that there was a temporary moratorium on the release of all recordings made in the house that fateful evening. Then I was told I could go. It was a hell of a struggle to get through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse. Copeland was able to obtain an emergency injunction on the grounds that they were in a private home, and he argued that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy. At least that's what was said. The newspapers vigorously fought the injunction against publication, and I strongly suspect they were assisted by my lawyers. When the case went to a full court hearing a few days later, the judge quickly lifted the injunction. The gist of the judge's decision was that the house belonged to me, not Copeland, and that he had no expectation of privacy within its walls, especially in one of the common rooms. And since the people who made the recordings were me and my guest, even if I didn't know that person from Adam, Copeland couldn't object to them being, in whole or in part, in the public domain. Well, I guess that's what the judge said. Most likely, the whole machination only increased public interest in the story. Because all the newspapers and television news programs came out with headlines, and more than I expected, showed these 2 photos and a few more that appeared in the following days. When the court finally acquitted them, the gory headlines and stories attached to these photos were, from my perspective, brilliant. One of them read, "Caught in the Act." Another read, "Cowardly Retreat," and the attached story explained how Copland calmly dressed himself while his mistress lay unconscious on the floor beside him. However, it was obvious that whoever took the footage from the video and gave it to the press was very careful in his actions. Jana's face was either cut out of the frame altogether or blurred. I think it's safe to say that after my antics with the high court judge, things went back to normal. I worked the second week in the new office and then returned home. However, I found that I could not stay in the house, so I temporarily stayed in a small hotel near my work. In the meantime, Miss Clarkson got on the phone and told me that she had been contacted by a lawyer working for Gina. From what Miss Clarkson had told me, I gathered that Gina was being harassed by the press guys. They must have found out that she was living in June's house. Anyway, Miss Clarkson informed me that Gina's lawyer had told her that his client didn't want a divorce. But if I insist, Gina is willing to accept the terms I propose. "We told him your name wasn't Hamilton," said Miss Clarkson, actually giggling. "Hamilton," I repeated, having no idea what that was supposed to mean. "Damn it, Steve, get over it," she laughed. "What year is it? Trafalgar, Nelson, Lady Hamilton." Oh yeah, very funny, I lied, not quite catching her joke. In any case, Miss Clarkson told me that Gina was in a hurry to get it all over with. Perhaps she thought it would somehow lead to the press leaving her alone. But actually, I think the press switched to other matters long before the case of our divorce really came up, although it still got a small headline on the inside pages of our local press. I agreed that everything would be divided in half, provided Gina was willing to admit that her adultery was the sole cause of the breakdown of our marriage, and she would agree to be a witness in any further proceedings I might decide to take against Alex. Somewhat surprisingly, Gina's lawyers asked me to agree to appear in court as a witness in the case she had brought against Alex. This confused me until Miss Clarkson informed me that it was probably a personal injury lawsuit and that the videotape we had made, a copy of which had already been given to Gina's lawyer, would probably be enough for Alex to settle out of court. I guess he did, because I never heard from him again. The house was sold very quickly, as the market was very good at the time. Gina took a few things she needed, and I put everything else in storage until I found another house I liked. But I had no time to look. Living in a hotel might not be fun, but you get used to it. Less work, no cooking, and it was cheaper than paying a mortgage. I even had free parking right in the city center. Sometimes some reporter would track me down, and I was even willing to talk to them. But they didn't seem interested in Gina and me. They all asked me what I really knew about my mysterious friend. I couldn't tell them anything, I'm afraid. But a couple of them, with whom I got on very well, confided to me that they thought there was something in Alex that was not yet known, and that they thought it must necessarily concern my mysterious friend, and I gave their calling cards to Miss Clarkson. Although by that time, she claimed not to be personally acquainted with the man either. This was not quite in keeping with some remarks she had made to me earlier in our acquaintance, but she used the words personal acquaintance. I don't know exactly. It might have been 2 or even 3 months since that fateful evening, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, I was sitting at my desk one day, looking at my computer screen as usual, when my desk shook when someone sat on it. I looked to my left and saw a pair of knees covered by a gray flannel. Looking even further left, I noticed that the flannel fabric stretched almost all the way down to a pair of Nike sneakers. Looking up, I saw an oversized blue sweater topped with a tuft of blonde hair and a pair of huge black horn-rimmed glasses. "Hello, handsome boy. What's a nice gentleman like you doing in a dive like this?" asked Sherry. "Hi, Sherry. Long time no see. What are you doing in these parts?" I replied. Sherry explained that our company had become one of her employer's largest clients, and she was assigned to visit us 1 day a month. Literally, to walk around and talk to the staff, employees in various departments, just to see if there were any program changes they could suggest to make their lives easier. "So what can I do for you?" I asked, trying to hide my surprise. "I'm fine with it as it is," Sherry replied. "Yeah, you'd be the first to let them know if you weren't happy." "No, Steve, I'm here to collect a debt." I had no idea what expression appeared on my face, but it caused Sherry to giggle. "Hey, handsome, you owe me dinner." "Really?" "Yes, that's right. You told me you couldn't ask me to dinner because you're a married man, and from what I read in the papers, you're not married anymore." "Yeah?" "Well, not as verbose, but the gist of what you said in the hotel bar that night was exactly that." "Yes?" By this time, I was trying to keep a confused expression on my face. "Come on, Steve, will you stop fooling around?" I can't remember what you said to me that night." "Steve, all right. Beautiful. I haven't been outside in weeks. This will do me good. Where do you want to go?" "Oh, nothing much. I have to catch a train home just after 9. What a disappointment." "Dinner," she said. "Behave yourself." "Damn, why do you pretty boys always talk like that?" "I'll be in the waiting room when you pass out." She grinned. Then she slid off my desk and left the department. As before, Sherry's transformation was amazing. It was impossible not to notice her as I stepped off the elevator. I don't think any of the men who passed through the waiting room while she waited for me could have missed her and probably wished she had waited for him. The 2 guards she spoke with, both late 50s or early 60s, were clearly fascinated by Sherry. As I approached, she pulled away from them and took my hand. Where are we going? She asked. First to the hotel. I need to change. No time, handsome. We have less than 4 hours. My train leaves at 9. But, no buts, Steve. We have a lot to talk about. I agreed, and accompanied by one of the guards who insisted on carrying Sherry's bag, we walked to my car. Stuffing my briefcase and Sherry's briefcase in the trunk, I drove us to a public house outside of town where I knew food was served all day. We talked for a while and ate leisurely. Sherry was not so much demanding as inviting me to speak my mind and share my thoughts. I don't know what it was about Sherry, but I felt I could talk to her, and I knew instinctively that what I said wouldn't be public knowledge the next day. When I spoke up, Sherry took me by surprise by going on the offensive and telling me why she had lured me out for an evening meal. Steve, you've got to do something about yourself, my friend. All the female coworkers in the office say that you are no longer the fun-loving guy you used to be. Of course, they all admit that they can't blame you for the circumstances, but frankly, they'd like to see some sign that the old Steve is still in you. I'm not with you, Sherry? No, I don't think you see it yourself. Steve, you've always been fun to work with. Even I realized that when we worked on the same projects, 4 or 5 times. And, even then, we never worked closely together. You do realize that for years now, all the women in your company have been turning to good old Steve in logistics and planning with their man problems? And from what I've heard, some of the guys have been coming to you for advice about their wives and girlfriends, too. That's news to me. Anyway, even if they are, I don't have what you'd call a good track record in marital relations anymore, do I? Silly, Steve. Everyone came to you because you showed them how to laugh. Well, at least see the funny side and laugh at things. Apparently, you were an ace at advising girls on what to get their men for birthdays and Christmas, and you didn't hesitate to advise them to dump those with no hope of success, nor were you bad at telling them how to dump them. Did you know, for example, that unofficially the HR girls tell new girls that if they have a problem with any of the office gigolos and don't want to file a formal complaint, they should find you and have a chat? This is news to me, but I can remember. Yes, I suspect you can, but Steve, everyone is afraid to say even 2 words to you now. They say you walk around the office like a bear with a sore head. They miss the old Steve, the one you can laugh and joke with. Look, we all understand that you're upset, but living in this damn hotel and not going anywhere, well, it's just not right. Not for you anyway. You need to get out and, start dating again. There are plenty of eligible women in the office. Sherry, I think I know what you're talking about, but didn't you tell me that going out with coworkers is bad news? Besides, we're going out tonight, aren't we? Yeah, we're having dinner, and I asked you out, remember? Yeah, but who's going to end up paying? I smirked back at her. See? This is the Steve that girls can't get enough of at the office. The guy who sees the funny side of everything, even if I'm about to order the most expensive dessert on the menu. Sherry smiled back at me. I see your point, and will try to leave my personal problems at home from now on. Do something better, Steve. Get yourself a nice apartment or something, and go out in the evenings. Even risk asking out some of the eligible women in the office. Look, I avoid coworkers at work because, sometimes I can look a little cheap when I dress up to go out and have fun. Some Romeos take it the wrong way and think I'm easy. I'm sure you know what I mean. And like I said, trying to teach the average man how to use a computer program when he looks at my cleavage is usually not very successful. I've seen it firsthand. I, of course, challenged Sherry and told her she could never look cheap, and we both smirked at each other. Then Sherry ordered her dessert. Not the most expensive one on the menu, by the way. Oddly enough, by the time we finished our dinner and dessert, I felt lighter. Sherry had a way of making things seem less complicated, more manageable. We parted with a promise to stay in touch, and I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things would start looking up again. A young woman named Sophie, who was new to the company. Sophie was just as eager to learn as Sherry had been when I first met her. Over lunch, Sherry explained that Sophie was her understudy, learning the ropes and getting acclimated to the company's systems and culture. Steve, Sophie here needs a crash course on how we operate, Sherry began, her eyes twinkling mischievously. And who better to teach her than the office sage himself? I laughed, feeling a warm sense of nostalgia wash over me. Well, Sophie, you're in good hands with Sherry, but I'll be happy to help out where I can. Sophie smiled, her enthusiasm infectious. Thank you, Steve. Sherry's already told me so much about you. She says you're the go-to person for just about everything. Flattery will get you everywhere, I replied with a grin. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily. Sherry and Sophie asked questions about the company's history, its various projects, and even about some of the office's unwritten rules and quirks. It was nice to feel useful again, to share my knowledge and experiences with someone eager to learn. After lunch, I walked them back to the office, feeling lighter than I had in months. Sherry's presence was like a breath of fresh air, and her insistence on dragging me out of my shell was exactly what I needed. That evening, as promised, I met Sherry for another dinner. This time, I was determined to enjoy myself without the lingering shadow of my past mistakes. Sherry and I talked about everything: our jobs, our dreams, our lives outside of work. I learned that she had aspirations beyond her current role, dreaming of starting her own business one day. Her ambition and drive were inspiring, reminding me of a time when I, too, had big dreams. As we finished our meal and walked back to the train station, Sherry turned to me with a serious expression. Steve, you've got so much life left to live. Don't let what happened hold you back. You're too good a person to let one bad chapter define you. Her words struck a chord deep within me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine sense of hope. Thank you, Sherry. I needed to hear that. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. Anytime, Steve. And remember, we're doing this again soon. No excuses. I watched her board the train, waving as it pulled away from the platform. As I walked back to my car, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Sherry was right. It was time to start living again. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I found a new apartment, closer to the office, and with a view that reminded me of why I loved the city. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I even took Sherry's advice and began dating again, cautiously at first, but with a growing sense of confidence. One day, as I was walking through the office, Bob stopped me with a knowing smile. Looking good, Steve. The old you is definitely back. I laughed, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Thanks, Bob. It feels good to be back. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward, and with friends like Sherry by my side, I knew I could handle whatever came my way. As I walked, but ended up sitting on a park bench to get the full story. The article detailed Alex's charges, which included several counts of fraud, embezzlement, and a slew of other financial crimes. His political career was over, and his legal career wasn't looking much better. As I read, a sense of vindication washed over me. The man who had tried to ruin my life was finally getting his comeuppance. Later that day, I mentioned the article to Sherry during our lunch break. She laughed and said, "Well, it looks like karma finally caught up with him. Serves him right." Indeed, I replied, feeling a bit lighter. Over the next few months, life gradually returned to a new kind of normal. My coworkers seemed more relaxed around me, and I even noticed some of the office gigolos giving me a respectful nod every now and then. Sherry and I continued our regular dinners, and she remained a constant source of support and encouragement. One evening, as we were walking to the train station after dinner, Sherry turned to me with a mischievous grin. "Steve, have you ever thought about taking a vacation? You know, getting away from all this for a while?" I chuckled. "A vacation? I haven't taken one of those in years." "Well, maybe it's time you did. Think about it. A nice trip somewhere sunny with lots of interesting sights and no stress." The idea was appealing, and I promised Sherry I'd think about it. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized just how tired I was. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. A vacation might be exactly what I needed. The next day, I started looking into possible destinations. After a week of research, I settled on Malta. It was a place I'd always wanted to visit, and the thought of exploring its rich history and beautiful landscapes was invigorating. When I told Sherry about my plans, she was thrilled. "That's fantastic, Steve. You're going to have an amazing time. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" I asked. "Promise me you'll relax and enjoy yourself. No thinking about work or any of the past drama. Just have fun. I promise, I said with a smile. And so, a few weeks later, I found myself on a plane to Malta. The trip was everything I'd hoped for and more. I explored ancient temples, swam in crystal clear waters, and even made a few new friends along the way. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. One evening, as I was sitting at a cafe overlooking the harbor, I thought about how far I'd come. From the chaos of my marriage and the drama with Alex, to finding my footing again with the help of friends like Sherry. Life had a funny way of turning around when you least expected it. When I returned home, I felt refreshed and ready to take on whatever came next. Sherry was eager to hear all about my trip, and we spent hours talking about everything I'd seen and done. "Steve, you look like a new man," she said, her eyes twinkling with delight. "I'm so glad you took that trip." "Me too," I replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thanks for pushing me to do it, Sherry." "Anytime, Steve. That's what friends are for." And with that, we raised our glasses in a toast to new beginnings and the adventures yet to come. Us would take the couch. In the end, I insisted she take the bed, and I would be perfectly fine on the couch. As we walked back to my apartment, Sherry was unusually quiet. I could sense that something was on her mind, but I didn't press her to talk. Instead, we enjoyed the cool night air and the occasional sounds of the city winding down. Once inside, I set up the couch with some blankets and a pillow, making sure it was as comfortable as possible. Sherry watched me with a thoughtful expression, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You're too kind, Steve," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Just being a good host," I replied, trying to keep the mood light. "Besides, you deserve the bed after dragging me to such a fantastic show." She laughed softly and shook her head. "I knew you'd enjoy it." As she settled into the bed and I lay down on the couch, I found myself thinking about how much my life had changed since I first met Sherry. Her presence had been a constant source of support and encouragement, something I hadn't realized I needed until she came along. The next morning, I woke up early to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. I found Sherry already awake, sitting at the small dining table with a cup of coffee. She looked up and smiled as I approached. "Morning, sleepyhead," she teased. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Like a baby," she replied. "Thanks for letting me stay over, Steve. I hope it wasn't too much trouble." "Not at all. You're always welcome," I said sincerely. As we sat there sipping our coffee, Sherry looked at me with a serious expression. "Steve, there's something I need to tell you." I set my cup down, giving her my full attention. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I've been offered a job in London. It's a big opportunity, and I'm thinking of taking it." A mix of emotions hit me at once. Happiness for her, but also a pang of sadness at the thought of losing her regular presence in my life. "That's amazing, Sherry. I'm really happy for you." "Thanks," she said, her eyes softening. "But it means I'll be moving soon. I just wanted you to know." I nodded, trying to process the news. "London, huh? That's quite a move." "Yeah, it is, but I think it's time for a change. For both of us," she added, her voice gentle. We spent the rest of the morning talking about her new job, her plans for the future, and reminiscing about the times we'd shared. By the time we got to the train station, I felt a mixture of pride and sadness. I knew she was making the right choice, but I also knew I'd miss her. As her train pulled into the station, Sherry turned to me and gave me a hug. "Thanks for everything, Steve. You've been a great friend." "Anytime, Sherry. Good luck with everything, and keep in touch, okay?" "I will," she promised, giving me one last smile before boarding the train. I watched as the train pulled away, feeling a sense of closure. Sherry had been right about a lot of things, especially about needing to move on and start fresh. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a newfound sense of determination. It was time to embrace the future and all the possibilities it held. A few weeks later, I received a postcard from Sherry. It was a picture of Big Ben with a short message on the back. "Miss you already, Steve. London is amazing. Come visit sometime, Sherry." I smiled as I read it, feeling a warmth in my chest. I knew that no matter where life took us, our friendship would always remain. Us would take the couch. Determined to play the gentleman, I insisted on taking the couch, but Sherry was equally adamant. She declared she'd rather sleep on the bench at the train station than force me out of my bed. Back at the apartment, I found a spare sheet and my old sleeping bag, which had been stashed in the car trunk for ages. It needed a good 20 minutes in the dryer to freshen up. While waiting, Sherry and I had tea, and she took a good look around my apartment. She had been here a couple of times before, but only for short visits to drop off groceries or other items. This time, she seemed more curious, examining the knickknacks and photos that made up my humble abode. Once the dryer finished its job, I set up what I thought was a decently comfortable bed on the couch. Our heated discussion about who would sleep on it resumed briefly until Sherry repeated her threat to head back to the station. Reluctantly, I headed to my bedroom while Sherry settled on the couch. In the middle of the night, I awoke to the gentle sensation of someone blowing in my ear. "Sherry?" I whispered. "Yes, Steve," she replied softly. "It looks like you're in the wrong bed, young lady. Are you objecting, old man, or just stating a fact?" "Stating a fact, I think." "Good. But Sherry?" "Steve, if you mention the 12-year age difference between us, I swear. Well, let's just say we won't start our married life on the right foot." "Married life?" I echoed. "Yes, now come on, show me what an old man can do." I wasn't surprised when Sherry didn't rush to the train station first thing in the morning. She had effectively set me up, and I had walked right into her plan. As we walked to the office, Sherry explained she was taking 4 days off to train new employees in the accounts department. She didn't go home until Sunday night that week. She also informed me that her company had a position that could be filled almost permanently by someone from my office. Not full-time, of course, just 3 days a week with flexible hours. Perfect for taking the kids to school and such, she added. "Kids?" I asked, slightly taken aback. "Of course, I want at least 2. You'll make a great father, Steve." "Well, that's all right then. For a moment, I thought you were going to say something else." "See, that's what I love about you. You always see the bright side." On our honeymoon, lying in each other's arms, too excited to sleep but too tired to do more for the moment, I asked, "Sherry, how long have you been planning to be my wife?" "That's a good question, old man. I suppose you could say it started when I saw the headlines about you, your first wife, and that Alex fellow." "So early?" "Yes, and if you were to accuse me of scheming, you might even question my motives for encouraging John to pick me up for dinner that night at the very hotel I'd chosen. I've had my eye on you for a long time. I guess I'll have to keep an eye on you, won't I?" "Yes, but don't mistake me for Gina. I know what I want when I see it, and I'll never do anything to risk losing it." Epilogue. On our honeymoon in Malta, we ran into a very surprised June. She revealed that she believed there was a hidden submissive streak in Gina that Alex had somehow picked up on. June noted that many of the women involved in his divorce proceedings seemed to be under some sort of male influence. "I don't know what this man has, but he can wrap some women around his finger," June told me. "But Gina turned against Alex and sued him, didn't she?" I remarked. "Gina is my little sister, Steve. I've always taken care of her, and perhaps that's my fault. Gina has always been subject to my wishes. I pushed her into that trial. I don't think she would have had the guts to see it through if it hadn't been for me. Fortunately, Alex settled out of court. I don't know how Gina would have handled it if they had been in the courtroom." "By the way, is this your new fiancé, Steve?" June asked, her eyes twinkling. "Of course. Sherry chased me down and caught me. She made a very good choice," I replied, squeezing Sherry's hand. June smiled warmly at us. "Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next video."